Now, a really important concept I think that we touch on is that not all fiber is the same. And this is something that, really concerns me when I see the keto diet coming on trend again, where people go, oh, it's fine. I'm still getting my fiber from all my veg. But actually what the science shows is that each different, type of food group actually delivers different types of not just the plant chemicals, but different types of dietary fibers. So if we're cutting out food groups, then actually we're missing out some key fibers that are going to have a negative impact on the gut microbiome. And this is nicely shown in a paper where they included close to 2 million people, and they showed for every 10 grams increase in dietary fiber a day, it reduced people's risk of colon cancer by 10%, which is similar to other stat that I showed you. But they then went a step further and looked at the type of fiber or the source of that fiber, and found for every 10 grams increase in fiber from whole grains, actually there was also that 10% decrease in cancer risk. They did the same for veggie fiber and fruit fiber, but actually didn't find an association. So didn't find that it had that protective effect like the whole grain fiber. Now, this is certainly not to say that we should be prioritizing whole grain fiber over any other type of fiber, but it does get you thinking about, if you are cutting out these food groups, the knock-on consequences of doing that. And there's a similar study that looked at breast cancer as well, and the importance of different types of fiber. So how are we doing as a nation? Well, we're not doing that great on the fiber front. So we're getting less than 20 grams of fiber a day. The government recommends we have about 30 grams of fiber. Eat More, Live Well will deliver at least 50 grams of fiber, and I'll show you why we probably want to go above 30 grams, although do it quite slowly and gently so your gut has time to adapt. And that's because of this gut-brain axis study, which I'll talk about. But also not just the amount of fiber, but we're really lacking in diversity. So this is some data that's come from a national food survey, and it shows where the fiber is actually coming from. And sadly, when you look at the veg and potato section, about a third of the fiber from the veg section is coming from potatoes. And similarly, from the cereal and cereal product group, nearly 50% of that fiber is actually coming from just two types of grains, when we actually know there is over 300,000 different types of different types of edible plants that we can be getting our fiber from. And we're really narrowing down. So we're really missing out on the diversity. Now, this diversity concept is something that essentially has stemmed from the scientific research around our gut microbiome. I don't think historically it was appreciated the importance of getting in these different types. And what we're understanding now is that it's not just about fiber. And historically it was, and we thought, look, if you're just getting in your fruit and veg, you're ticking your fiber, great. But actually we're appreciating there's many other types of these plant chemicals, things like the prebiotics, which feed the good bacteria, the polyphenols, as I mentioned, and other bioactives. So this is just one example of the humble apple, which contains close to 300 different plant chemicals, including 100 million bacteria in each different apple, which is pretty impressive. And this is just the apple. So if you extrapolate this out to all the other plants, you start to get more of an appreciation of the importance of diversifying your diet. And this is something I talk more about in the book. Now, in terms of this diversity, how does it reflect in terms of the gut health research? Well, this is a nice study which really clearly highlighted the difference between diversity. So what it did is looked at people who had ate at least 30 different types of plants per week versus people who ate only 10 different types of plant-based foods per week. And what they found, those who ate the more diversity actually had much better gut health than those who ate the same foods on repeat. And interestingly, they also looked at whether the people were vegan versus omnivores, so people who ate plants but also ate animals. And they showed that actually being vegan didn't necessarily mean people had better gut health. What was key was this concept of diversity. And this is something that, I talk about more in the book, and I'm really passionate about, is that we understand that as long as you base your diet on plants, so hence the word plant-based, whatever you choose to add on top of that is completely up to you and is not going to damage your gut, unlike, a lot of the kind of myths out there. So if you choose to eat animal products, that's completely fine. So wherever you sit along this plant-based eating spectrum in terms of our overall health and gut health is fine. You can achieve great outcomes. You don't need to go 100% vegan. Now, in terms of going vegan, I completely understand why people want to do that from, animal cruelty reasons, environmental reasons, cultural reasons. But in terms of the health, the science doesn't actually suggest that that's the best thing to do, because we know that there's many animal sources of nutrients, which, are things like omega-3 were actually quite important for things like our gut health. Now, that's not to say that you can't be really healthy and be vegan. It's just that you need to be a little bit more savvy about some of the nutrients and where you're getting them from. And again, I talk through that more in Eat More, Live Well. If people do want to go vegan, what sorts of things they might want to consider, like algae oil, omega-3 supplements, and the B12, etc. Now, I mentioned a study before about this gut-brain axis, and this still to date is my favorite study, which I didn't undertake, but some of my colleagues from Australia, from the Food and Mood Centre, did. And it was really landmark, I think, because it was the first time through a very robust design, which showed and gave me confidence that actually nourishing the gut through the right nutrition, our gut microbes can have, clinically relevant and important outcomes in terms of our mental health. So what the researchers did is they took a group of people who had moderate to severe depression. They randomized half to getting this gut boosting diet, which is full of plants, so very much a plant-based diet. And I'll talk more about that diet soon. Or the other half didn't change their diet, but had befriending type of counseling. And that was an important design because they wanted to make sure that any benefit in the diet group wasn't just because they were seeing the dietitian, but actually because of the food. And they reviewed their mental health 12 weeks later using these validated questionnaires we use in clinical practice. And what they found in the diet group, after just 12 weeks, 32% of them had a significant improvement in their depression scores, which would have classified them as no longer clinically depressed, versus only 8% in the control group. Now, I just find that such a powerful statistic. And, it's something that I absolutely do see in my own clinical practice at the Gut Health Clinic, that nourishing our gut can have these really powerful results on mental health. Now, it is important that I do highlight that all the participants stayed on their antidepressant medications because they had moderate to severe depression. So if anyone who's listening to this is on antidepressants, absolutely continue them. Please do not go cold turkey, but find comfort in the fact that as an additional therapy, we know that having, a gut boosting diet may very well help support your management. And certainly what I experienced in clinic is that for a lot of patients, actually, we've gotten them off the antidepressant medications with the support of their psychiatrist through just nourishing their gut over 4 to 6 months. But again, depression is very heterogeneous, so there's not going to be one size fits all, but this is a very, robust piece of evidence, and there's been subsequent studies which have reaffirmed these findings. So what did the diet entail? Well, as I mentioned, it was plant-based and delivered 50 grams of fibre per day. Now, as I mentioned before, the government recommends we have 30 grams of fibre, and I've highlighted with the meal plans and Eat More, Live Well, I wanted to hit that 50 grams based on this study, because I do see that pushing above that, really can have these powerful results. You'll also note that actually it's not plants only, it's just plant-based. And that means that things like omega-3, B12 and choline, which we know also have an important role in our mental health, are quite high, which come from some of the animal foods like oily fish and the fermented dairy. Oh, all right. So moving into the kitchen. So this essentially is where I bring, or I translate that kind of hard scientific evidence into the practical, everyday sorts of strategies. And I think this is important because I think, sometimes in the scientific world, we get very stuck in our mechanistic ways and kind of talking about the science, but actually we don't then share how people can start to embrace the power of their gut health. So that's where the diversity diet had come from, really, me trying to translate the science around our gut microbiome and tapping into that latest scientific evidence about how not just the body, but our gut microbes work best. So the diet really is underpinned by 5 principles. Now, I should highlight this is about diet, like food. It's not about dieting. And that is an important distinction. So the first concept is mostly plants. Now, when I say, mostly plants, to a lot of my clients, when I was testing out the diversity diet on them, a lot of them were like, oh, that means it's going to be a boring diet. And this is where I highlighted, actually, no, when I talk about plants, remember, there is this super six. It's 6 different types of plant-based food groups. And it's really important that we include all of them, not only for the flavor, which they all contribute, unique flavors, but for the health benefits in terms of they all provide different types of plant chemicals to nourish not just the human cells, but also our gut microorganisms. As I alluded to before, the concept is mostly plants, plant-based, not necessarily plants only. And an example I wanted to give is this stuffed pasta shells recipe, which is in Eat More, Live Well, where instead of it being like your standard ricotta and spinach, pasta, where actually 50, if not 80% of it is ricotta cheese, so an animal food. What I've done is actually made the base of the diet plants by adding in a can of mixed legumes, the mixed chickpeas, lentils, butter beans, etc. And then also added not just the spinach, but also added in some peas to get in that slightly sweet flavor, and then put it on like a bed of really rich sun-dried tomato and garlic, and then inside also added a little bit of ricotta and feta for flavor. So instead of it being like 80% animal product like most ricotta cheeses, what I've done is transformed it to make it more like 90% plants. So that is really the concept that I'm going for, is that basing your diet on plants, and then if you want to add extra flavors on top of that, then that's completely up to you. Taste is certainly something that a lot of my clients were like, if I'm adding more plants in, I don't really like plants. And this is when, I need to explain to them there is a world of difference between soggy Brussels sprouts and, this super Brussels sprout pesto, which I love testing on people who tell me, I don't like Brussels sprouts, because when you have this, you will be converted. My husband was one of those people, and he was like, oh my God, I can't taste any Brussels sprouts in there. So, you can cook a steak terribly. It's all about how you cook veggies as well. You need to add the right flavors. And I hope with Eat More, Live Well, that's one of the, the key practical strategies. They talk about how to work with very simple flavors, really to really emphasize the deliciousness of different plants. And things like, smoothies, I always include some sort of nut, seed, and vegetable, as well as a fruit, and sometimes even a legume like silken tofu in my smoothies, and the flavor combination just really works. Now, it's not just about kind of like hiding or disguising the flavor of plants. There is some, really exciting work out there highlighting, and something I've seen in clinic forever, is that actually over time, our taste buds regenerate and retrain to really enjoy food. And this is one of the case studies I share in the book, but it's not all anecdotal evidence. There is, some good hard science behind it, highlighting this study here. It was just after 2 weeks. The participants not only of adding more veg into their or more plants into their diet, they not only started to have they associated plants with more pleasure, so they enjoyed the flavor, but also were more sensitive to sweet foods as well. Ease is something that I really wanted people to appreciate, is aligned with plant-based. You don't need to go and make all these wacky kind of food supplements like these blended powders and go to all the the whole food supermarkets and spend loads of money. It's really easy to add more plants into your diet, and here are a whole heap of 1-minute snacks that you can easily make, and don't cost you the world and have the flavor there in addition to the plants. So that brings me on to the second concept or principle of the diversity diet, and that is diversity all the way. So this 30 target that I set people, it's more of just it's not for people to fixate on this number of 30, but it's really just a fun way to engage people in all the different types of plants out there. So my online community really got behind this Plant Points challenge, and if you are looking for something in the new year to kind of get your family and colleagues and friends to embrace in a very healthy way, I would recommend you try it. I have a bit of a template in Eat More, Live Well, where you can start checking off how many different types of plant points you get each and every week. or each and every day. You can, just do it for a week if it's too burdensome, but it's a really, I think exciting way to appreciate the different types of plants out there and the flavors they contribute. So essentially this is what 30 plant points could potentially look like in your diet. And for people who are like, oh my God, I am not buying all that food, it's going to, take ages at the grocery store and cost a lot more. Rest assured, there are a lot of diversity hacks I talk about in the book. So things like, instead of just buying broccoli, you get your stir fry mix. Instead of just getting your strawberries, get your mixed veg. Same with your legumes, same with your grains, same with your nuts and seeds. And I even have a food brand called BioMe, which some of you may already know about, but in our granolas and our porridges and muesli, we have 15 different types of plant points in each and every bowl. So it's a convenient way if you don't want to make your own breakfast cereals, but it is really easy to make your own granola if you want to do that. The third principle is going for whole, not refined. And this is a principle that had stemmed from my research at King's, where we're looking at different food additives and starting to appreciate that actually some food additives that which were historically regarded as safe, so GRAS is what they were called, actually that was only testing on human metabolism, so how they're affecting our human cells. So ESFA, so the European Food Safety Authority, is now kind of going through all the food additives and wanting to reassess actually how they're impacting our gut bacteria. And some of the pilot studies are suggesting maybe some of them aren't great for our gut bacteria. Now, when we see this whole world of, a lot of people going vegan for January, a lot of people are starting to rely on these ultra processed vegan burgers, which are loaded with food additives. Now, I don't want to necessarily scare people into it because we don't have the scientific evidence really to highlight that just yet, still in pilot sort of stages. But I would get people to kind of second guess about the need to be having all these kind of ultra processed foods with the different food additives in it. When there's, it's really easy. This burger here, this smoky beet burger takes 15 minutes to make. You make them in bulk, put it in the freezer. It is really quite easy to make your own, and also they taste nicer generally. The other thing is, going for whole, not refined. Another example is oats. So instead of getting like the ground porridge oats, we know that the jumbo oats actually have a much better impact on your blood sugar spikes. So that's kind of the reason behind, or the science behind going for whole, not refined, is trying to get the whole version. It's the one that looks more like the one that's come out of the ground, essentially. Inclusion, not exclusion. So this means that absolutely your favorite foods can still be on the menu. And it's just about what you're adding in and having that focus on adding in. So this is where this prebiotic Rocky Road comes into play, because I love Rocky Road. What I've done is just added in a whole lot of extra plants to get to I think it's 10 and a half plant points in this one. And for anyone who's been on a diet, I'm sure you'll appreciate that as soon as someone tells you that you're not allowed a food, all you want is that food. You fixate on it. And there's, really good scientific evidence out there highlighting this kind of dieting world of how it really does damage your relationship with food and increases your risk of binge eating, and is the reason why, I think 95% of people don't follow any of these restrictive diets for longer than a couple of months. And then they not only gain the weight back, but extra. And that's thought to be down to kind of the damage that these restrictive diets have done on starving the gut microbiome. And I talk more about that in the book. But you can clearly tell it's a passion point. Now, whenever I tell people about this prebiotic chocolate bar, they go, oh, but surely that's got loads of calories. And, if I don't count calories, surely I'll gain weight. And, with the diversity diet, I absolutely do not get people to count calories, and they don't gain weight. And, the reason why this cold calorie fixation is flawed is, comes down to the science about how calories are measured. So firstly, when they're measured in the lab, actually the food gets completely burnt down to work out how many calories is in a food. But we know whole foods, actually, when we eat them, we don't burn all that energy. A lot of it gets malabsorbed. So for example, almonds actually can give our body 30% less calories than the label says. So actually calorie information is not that accurate when it comes to whole foods. Secondly, is that calorie information doesn't take into account this thermogenic effect, which is the energy required to actually break down food, which we know is much higher for whole foods versus ultra processed foods. And then also it doesn't take into account this satiety factor. Where you've probably been there before. You've had you know, some ultra processed burger, and after it straight away you're like, God, I feel stuffed, but actually maybe a couple of hours later you're like, oh, I could go round two. Whereas if you had, you know, the same amount of food coming from whole foods, actually you'd feel fuller for longer. So this satiety factor again is a really important one, and this is why, you know, there's a really impressive paper that came out in Cell Metabolism, which is one of the one of the, you know, highest scientific journals out there, which actually compared. What they did is they put people on diets, one ultra processed, one unprocessed diet. It's kind of like the diversity diet, and they matched them for calories. So they had exactly the same calories. And they showed that when they went on the ultra processed diet, actually people ate a whole lot more, which comes back to that satiety factor. And also they gained a whole lot more weight despite being matched for calories. So that's just another example why, you know, the calorie kind of counting fixation, you know, is not a great way if you know, weight management is one of your key outcomes or overall health outcomes. So I talk more about this gut metabolic kind of relationship when it comes to the diversity diet. Not that, you know, weight is just, you know, one of the things that we see. I think one of the more powerful roles of looking after gut come more of things like our mental health, our heart health, and all those other things that aren't as superficial as the weight management. But hey, you know, weight is something a lot of people are focused on. And then the fifth and final principle is around taste, pause, and enjoy. And this is one that, you know, I think is really important that I included, because so many people I see and are probably who are now going to be trying the diet have come from a dieting restrictive background, and they've, you know, they feel out of control with foods. You know, a lot of people I see at the gut clinic, they you know, they come to me and I talk about, you know, having, you know, occasional chocolate and things like that, having the prebiotic chocolate bark and things like that. And they say, oh no, I could not keep any chocolate in the house because I would just binge eat on it. And, you know, I would say about 80% of the people that I see have that kind of relationship with certain foods. So this is where some of the exercises I have in Eat More, Live Well come into play, where, you know, it's about looking at your relationship with food and kind of getting you to re-engage. And I talk through how, you know, most people after about 12 weeks following this exercise a couple of times a week actually do start to then trust themselves and feel a lot of enjoyment after having, you know, a normal portion versus eating, you know, 300 grams of chocolate if they are, you know, subject to it. So I think that's a really important one, because food is not just about what we're putting into our bodies, but also about how we're eating, the enjoyment, all of those sorts of things that we know is, you know, predicts people's eating behaviors. And that's something that I wanted to touch on there. Now, in the final 1 minute, I just wanted to share some of the tools that I have in Eat More, Live Well. So about a third of the book is, you know, the science and the kind of this toolkit, which helps you then translate, I guess, that science into, you know, what sorts of things you should be buying, what sorts of, you know, meal plans you might want to follow, and just giving people, I guess, essentially inspiration. And then the 2/3 is really coming down to those diets, those coming down to the different recipes, which include things like, you know, really simple recipes, as well as, you know, feeding families, etc. So on that note, I will wrap up and take any questions from you guys.
Megan, thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. We've had lots of questions coming in. So if I just stop you sharing, sorry. Right, lots of questions, and some of them are kind of more myth busting. So I think I might do some of those quick fire ones and then one to the bigger ones. So first of all, Tanya asked, really interesting, thank you. She says, people often say they find meat hard to digest. Do you think that's a myth, or is there some truth in that?